Please pronounce your name correctly for me.
Anne Brennan.
And your current role is as the executive director at the Cameron Art Museum in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Correct.
Lovely. How did you get into the sort of the creative fields? So like your childhood, were your parents interested in the arts and creativity? Like what was sort of your path and your journey that led you to this?
Yeah, my father was a drummer, and both of my parents came up through the Depression, and he was living in New Jersey, outside of Manhattan, and drumming on trash can lids and oatmeal tops, and perched on Gene Krupa's stoop to try to get some lessons. He was a poor kid from Newark.
Well, I was going to say, what kind of drummer? Jazz drummer, rock drummer?
Well, he was born in 1920, and so he came up straight through the big band era, and so that's when the drummer was the band leader. So it was jazz, and he was the only kid in his family that ever went to college or got out of Newark. All the rest of the enclaves stayed in New Jersey, but he got a music scholarship to go to Miami. And that was thanks to a high school counselor saying, "John, you got a shot at this." And my father just fell on the floor laughing. "Are you kidding me?" His dad was chief of police in Newark, and that was, and his parents were immigrants from Ireland, and so none of that was in the cards. And so the music was very definitely a part of our life. And my mother was very interested in visual art, and she took some oil painting. Excuse me, my cat just raked her paws across my chin. She took some oil painting classes at the fledgling, what is now University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Well, it was Wilmington College back in the 60s. And Mama took some nighttime oil painting classes with a prominent artist here in Wilmington, Claude Howell. I know, Matt, you know Claude. And he would set up still lives, and he would teach them to hold the brush at the end and work, work large and work away from the easel. And well, one night he set up a still life of Indian corn, lovely, beautiful, beautiful burgundies and blacks and yellows. And so Mama got very serious, and she began to choke down on the ferrule of that brush, and she was this far from the corn, corpse all over. And Claude's circulating, the classroom, and he just came along and his thumb right through all of her kernels, and she packed up her little box of oil paints and put them behind her hat boxes. And as a kid, I knew where the paints were. So I got into them and began to copy greeting cards and calendar pages and, what kids do. That's all I wanted to do was paint. And so Little St. John's Art Gallery, which is now Cameron Art Museum, was the only place in town to have any art lessons. And so the museum where I now work was really, it was everything. It was where, someone took me to a gallery and said, "That's a painting. That is a sculpture." So in a small town, having some sort of art center, there weren't galleries here, Matt. There were very few movie theaters. Salient, our beautiful theater downtown was not that active, and so it very much informed my interest. And coming up through public school during the throes of desegregation, everything was so destabilized, and the arts are very much the first thing ever cut, and the schoolrooms are way overcrowded, and so to pursue any art interest, it had to be pretty much outside of school.
And so do you still paint or make art yourself?
No, not now. I don't. I went back to grad school as an old person when I was 48 and got a studio degree. Yeah, I left the museum, but then the museum was the best job offer I had coming back. So
Okay. Yeah, my connection, I actually know Wilmington a little bit because I used to come here as a child on vacation. My my uncle used to be the rector at St. James down on 3rd Street when I was a kid. So we used to come down and visit family basically.
I didn't realize that.
Long time ago. Yeah. Back when Wrightsville Beach water, you couldn't boil it or freeze it like that long ago.
Yes.
Yep. That's when we used to come here. All right. So based on you, so one thing that like I've got a series of little questions that I've sort of want to touch on, so which is very abnormal for me. Usually I just roll with it, but the first thing is basically just the role of an executive director of a museum. To me, that's a very bureaucratic title versus like curator or other things which are very sort
Hmm.
of artistic titles kind of things to
Hmm.
me. So what do executive directors do at a museum?
Well, they have, oversight of staff. Oftentimes, deputy director is. We finally hired a deputy director that's more involved with personnel on a an everyday level. A weakness, oftentimes, we started as a small museum, and we're a small regional museum now. But oftentimes, there are too many people answering to the director of a smaller institution. So we've really tried to diversify that and build a team building environment. And we've really changed the culture of the museum from back in the day. But back to your really great question about curatorial versus administrative. Oftentimes, with a regional museum, the ED is the chief curator, and that's what our institution is. Also, it's not necessarily a strength by any means, but the the curatorial positions are the ones so very hard to create and keep.
Yeah, well, from funding aspect, absolutely.
Yep. So, but we're getting there, and we have more staff. We have a curator of exhibitions who works very closely with collections too, and so there are basically three of us that work so closely with exhibitions. But our education team informs it. Our overall work is to dovetail and interlace the departments as much as possible. So you even to include our restaurant, we run a full service restaurant, but it's not separate from the museum. So we try to work in curatorial aspects even with the restaurant.
So more or less like at least your title at your museum. So let's not talk about everybody's museum. So the museum you work at, your
Hmm.
role it could be interchangeably. You could say chief curator or executive director.
Yeah, it's both. Yeah,
Okay.
but the ED is hired by, I think, with any museum that the executive director answers to a board of trustees, and they hire the executive director, and then that individual has oversight of all of the hiring and firing of staff, and for want of another word, carries the vision and mission forward with everything. We're constantly trying to right ourselves with, is this true to our mission, as an educational institution? And curiously, that's what's so often not well understood by the public, is that museums are educational institutions.
Well, that's what I was about to ask. So like based on what you just
Yeah.
said, so like okay, different museums would have different visions slash museum like missions. So what is the mission of the Cameron Art Museum currently? Because I'm sure that it evolves over time. So what is it right now?
Our work basically falls into four categories, which we have found has been our rudder ever since our establishment in 1962. So we're trying to stay true to the purposes of the institution since its inception, and that's overall commitment to community. And of course, there are many ways to effect that. Support of artists, collection, care, stewardship, interpretation of a permanent collection, and to lifelong learning, which is 0 to later years. And so we're a complex little beastie, Matt. It's curious how complex an art museum can be, but from with that umbrella, with basically being a cultural gathering place and an educational institution, there are many different ways to serve that, such as running a museum school, running a full service restaurant, and being in service, which you would appreciate knowing this area. Our service region is 8 counties of southeastern North Carolina. And you know the extraordinary geography of North Carolina is really something, but Wilmington is a rather it's an urban center. And then there is a radius about 130 miles that's roots its roots are agrarian and rural, say from Brunswick County, Bladen, Duplin, Columbus, Onslow, Sampson. And then there is all the resources of the Triangle region. But our service region are those counties surrounding us. So a good bit of our educational work is completely outside the walls of the museum.
You mentioned curatorial processes and board of directors and all this kind of stuff. These are all things that I want to know more about.
Okay.
So okay, the reason, okay, let me take a step back. I used to work slash run in a nonprofit organization, and I did a horrible job with my board of directors. Uh, I was really bad at it as far as trying to find people and all. And by the time I was done, it took me like 10 years, but I figured out how to sort of come up with a good board of directors for our mission. So my question for you would be, based on your mission, how do you seek out slash choose board of directors?
Well, you work with, your current executive committee, et cetera. But
Wait, what's an executive committee?
the executive committee is your board chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, 2 members at large, and of course, there are terms that create people in more seasoned positions. It takes a while to learn the ropes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, okay, wait, take it back a step because like I'm going off of stupidity here, so bear with me. The How many board members do you have? So how large is it?
Our bylaws state that it's about 16 members, but your bylaws are just a tool to go by. They don't, rule everything. They're a guide. And for example, when we ran a capital campaign to expand the institution and needed to raise what rang in at 13 million, the board grew considerably, up to 30 some people. And then your challenge there is to then wean it back down because there was so much fundraising effort. But of course, I mean, what folks say is you're looking for time, talent, or something else. You're
Influence,
either,
wealth.
yes. So since we're an education institution, we have educational professionals. We have, oftentimes it helps to work out a skills matrix to help in an advisory capacity, folks with financial acumen, legal help, because we're always in need of all of those things. And of course, that helps keep you on the straight and narrow. The executive director can't begin to, maybe some can, I certainly don't begin to have all of the knowledge in those areas that we need.
Well, do you have like in your mind at least maybe so maybe not in writing, but in your mind, you have like, okay, on our board of directors, we need to have like somebody who specializes in law, somebody who specializes in fundraising. Like, do you have sort of like set seats that you're like, okay, we have a seat that has a need, and so we fill it that each of those seats with somebody that fills that sort of role, or is it you get people and then you just sort of put them into different roles?
It's a great question. The matrix with the skill set is one guide, and the other guide, and you see where they mesh sometimes beautifully. The other guide, Matt, is this is a volunteer position. Keep in mind, your board was all volunteers. Crazy, crazy people devoting their time and energy, egos, all kinds of different motivations sometimes to this position. But the best source are the people that already need that institution in their lives. So they're the folks you see coming to the museum, coming to the jazz series, coming to brunch every Sunday. Maybe they're already in a volunteer position. We have a volunteer corps of over 100 people.
Hey, your docents, right?
Docents, visitor services staff, shop sales, clerical work, help center. We want a human being answering the phone if possible when you call. And so that's the best recruiting ground. But then also sometimes there's a lawyer in that is, and so, and the matrix, really the skills piece is, you don't want too many lawyers on your board or too many accountants, or so you just
Or too
you,
many artists, because we're just as
oh Lord,
crazy in our own way.
yes, yes. But the artists oftentimes, I mean, I've been executive director 10 years. Oftentimes the artists are really the ones that bring us back from mulling over the bottom line, bottom line, bottom line, and getting distracted and running amok. The artists are the ones who bring us back to the purpose and right the ship every time.
Okay, wait. Speaking of that, there is a thing that I was wondering about because I okay, this is again, I'm just going to work from a place of stupidity through this entire conversation. But if I were to define the Cameron Art Museum, I would define it as a sort of a publicly accessible private museum. But I'm sure that's not the right sort of vernacular to explain what the museum is but I say that because it has the Cameron name on it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a public museum. So it's sort of somewhat private collection founded, named, but it's a publicly accessible thing. So how do you sort of balance that?
That's that's difficult in the private piece is the legal charter.
Okay.
We're a private 501c3, which classifies us as a charity fully licensed for you to realize a full tax donation from, period. The name is because of a bequest of land and seed money. So it's not dissimilar to other, the Hirshhorn Museum or the Walters Art Museum or
Guggenheim.
Perez, Guggenheim, right. But perhaps to your point, yes, and we're curiously, there's not another museum in the state of North Carolina like this one, in that we are owned by the community. And when I say that, we're not state affiliated. We've got no parent taking care of us whatsoever, and that's the only museum. Greenville, in Greenville, North Carolina, Northeast North Carolina, the Greenville Museum of Art is similar, but they're much smaller. But we are a public entity. But if we were, say, named the Wilmington Museum of Art, that would connote, a municipality taking care of us, and nothing could be farther from the truth.
So let me get it clear. County, city, state, no financial support, no nothing like that towards the Cameron Art Museum,
If we write a successful grant,
which was what I was leading to,
yes,
actually, which was the
and so
next question was, do you apply for grants
sure,
from places like the NEA and the National and the
sure,
North Carolina Arts and all these kinds of places?
constantly, yeah. We just got the NEA CARES grant, during the COVID. So, but if it's just if they're one off, and that's to include the city and county,
Right. So there'd be what, like no ongoing support, but
right,
project based or program based support upon
right,
a application of a whatever grant or whatever kind of income you can get from them.
right. It's tough, but Matt, I think you will find this as astonishing as we are too. This year with the pandemic, it's the first time. It's always been, just as you say, the grants are project based. So we have to come up with great educational programming, say in Duplin County, and taking teaching artists into the schools and this, that, and the other. And it's hard to have any of that go back to general operations that we need. So, but since the pandemic, even with smaller foundations locally and also on more governmental scale, we're seeing a crack through with general operations monies.
That's one of the biggest pet peeves about all of that funding is they are fabulous for funding a specific subject related or topic related project or something like this. Great, but unfortunately, it doesn't. Almost never fund well just keeping the lights on or paying the salaries. Like they're always about an additional thing. So like basically, like you have to be able to function as a whatever organization and get enough money to keep your doors open in order to get this extra money to do now this extra job that you've created
Exactly.
for this extra money, but you can't get money to just keep your doors open.
Exactly. So, say we've got a fabulous exhibition of, celebrating the ratification of the 19th Amendment, 100 works of art by 100 women. And we know, some kids in Bertie County, they're coming up with the money to bring the kids in. Well, if our utilities bill just to be able to house that exhibition is $1,100 a day, and that's not salaries, that doesn't count. So in order to, it's such a chicken egg situation. But we are seeing a little change with operations funding. And then of course we every chance we get we write in staff labor costs, but oftentimes with the grants it's an in-kind match, which really doesn't help us much.
Well, but it's also a little bit ridiculous because to a certain extent, you also have to pay to have a full-time grant writer on staff to write these grants to hopefully get this money, but there's no guarantees. So like they may be the best grant writer in the world, but they're just for whatever reason, the judges, the jury, the whatever just decided not to fund whatever your project was that particular year. So
Right.
it's such a nebulous thing and it's you sort of have to I mean it's very hard because as an artist, like we write grants and things like this, but to think of a museum that like hangs their future plans on the same hopes and dreams that artists do when we write grants, it
Yeah.
seems rather intimidating.
Well, the stakes are mighty high. So anyway,
Agreed.
that's
Yeah.
a
Okay. All right. Back to the point of you say that you're the chief curator of the place because I always have this question of like how do museums choose their exhibitions? How do they craft their stuff? Because I mean, basically, like certain museums can do certain things because they have large scale stuff. You all, as a general whole, have basically two exhibition halls. Would that be right to say?
we have two large exhibition wings. You're correct, and then we've got a flex space that we're using for exhibitions
Yes,
increasingly,
the old
and
gift shop.
then our reception hall is going to be a large scale exhibition space in 2-3 weeks, which is unusual, and that's because of the pandemic. We're pretty excited about it, but it's going to be an exhibition of 50 artist made lanterns. So it's just going to be light and design and shape and communication. But ordinarily that's a space where we do music programming, facility rentals, wedding receptions, and that's gone. So we're using it as exhibition space now. So every chance to turn a limitation into a plus is what we're doing.
We got to get creative in these crazy days. So but the question really sort of is getting I'm trying to get to is what is your process for coming up with, creating, pitching, approving a project, an exhibition? So like is it all a trickle down like you start everything and it goes down? Do people can outside curators propose things? Like so like how does that process actually work?
We organize every exhibition we do, which is it's very rarely that we bring in a turnkey exhibition, and that's primarily financial because loan exhibitions generally are so very expensive. So all through the years, we learned to bring in guest curators or write the catalog, spike the punch, spackle the walls, drive the scissor lifts, work with the artists, curate the shows, and we work with ideas that are contemporaneous to the time. For example, right now we have, an exhibition pertaining to the 19th Amendment. We have an exhibition of Black Art Matters with Willie Cole's Blackronyms, which is very timely to current dialogue. We have a very large scale project that we've been working on for over 2 years now for an installation of a sculpture on our grounds to commemorate U.S. colored troops who fought successfully at a battle on our site. And so that there are attendant exhibitions with that. And so it's looking more broadly at issues and trends and concerns of the time. Oftentimes will be more core exhibitions. And then opportunities, we will leave the schedule fairly flexible because opportunities come along that you have to you regret not being able to bend your knees and make it happen.
Well, part of why I'm asking is because like I've spoke to other curators and museum directors, and they're often talking about like 2 and 3 years of planning and preparations to have
Mm-hmm.
exhibitions come up. So like you all are a smaller museum, which gives you a little bit more flexibility than some of these larger institutions. So the
Mm-hmm.
question is sort of like, do you have to plan as far in advance as some of these big institutions, or can you
Oh
do
yeah,
things a bit faster?
it's both, but ideally you need at least 2 years to find the funding to do it. At least 2 years, particularly if there's any kind of publication or you can deepen your educational programming. And we increasingly work with partners on exhibitions. For example, we're working with the digital art department at UNC Wilmington currently on a project 2 years hence that is it's going to be all on the grounds of the museum with video projections and working very closely with the Algae Society. So it's integrating art and science principles. So the best work, you need time to be able to do it. But then there are some, say for instance, a foundation here in Wilmington contacted us. They had a chance to bring in several panels of the AIDS quilts to Wilmington, and they wanted a community wide installation of the quilts. And we were able to take the lead on that. And we had 4 or 5 months lead time, but it was so important. It was so close to our hearts, and we knew how important it would be to the community. We shifted things around and made it happen. So it's both with our process. As I was saying, being a community institution and not state run, that's terrifying every single day from a fundraising standpoint. But we really do have a great deal of autonomy with programmatically that we can move swiftly. If all of our team, and it's our education team, curatorial, you name it, if we all feel this is right, we've got a series of questions that we ask ourselves and answer. Why this exhibition now? Why Cameron Art Museum? Is it within our range? Which audiences is this going to build audience? And if so, where and how? How deeply integrated is it with educational possibility? So we hold ourselves to those questions when an idea comes along, and a lot of things wind up on the cutting room floor.
Oh, I'm sure there are hundreds of ideas for every one that comes through into fruition, because not just whether the idea is good, but whether or not you have the space, you have the art, and whether you have the funding.
Yeah, we, like so many institutions now, with restrictions on loans. The exhibitions we organize, oftentimes we secure loans from other institutions. Well, the majority of us are showing permanent collection work now and looking at it in new ways, which is greatly beneficial for us, to calm down and really reinvest in the permanent collection interpretively. So, and that's keeping our costs down.
Which is great. I have lots of questions about your permanent collection,
Okay.
but but let's take one step back. So you all curate the exhibitions in-house generally. That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
One question that a lot of artists and people that I talk to, and even curators and all this kind of stuff that I talk to, that I often wonder about is basically how can artists or or curators or any of these people sort of get on the radar of a museum. It's like, if I'm an artist and I'm making something, how can do you all do studio visits? Do you like how do you find out about these different people and sort of try to engage with them?
Ideally, you have curatorial staff and the funding to do just that, to make studio visits. And we're very remiss in that, and also where we're situated. You know how kind of almost third world Wilmington is. So just getting out and about is,
I might
uh,
not call it third world, but okay.
but that
It
is,
it is sort of at the end of the road, yes.
yeah. So the answer to those ambitious and important artists asking that question, the institutions that have staff that their job every day is paying attention, is finding the really great work being communicated today, and it's on a an arc of maturation, and uh, that's ah that's the best, but that's not necessarily. We're trying to stay on the pulse of things, and so sister institutions seeing the shows that they're putting together, that helps us see new work, and we've got great sister institutions in the region. But for a young aspiring artist, it's to work hard and have something really important to communicate, and to communicate it well. Oftentimes young artists they'll have these great ideas, but the realization of it is wanting. So it might be weak in.
Or the other way around. Sometimes
Right,
it's
right,
absolutely amazing craftsmanship and skill, but not a very interesting idea.
right, right.
I know. I
And
teach.
so,
I know. But and it's hard. I mean, within that kind of thing, like, so if you're looking, okay, I'm interested in this little tidbit with like, what if you're looking at an artist and you're trying to define, like, are they meeting the criteria that makes them worthy to be in an exhibition in your museum? What are you looking for? Like, what are some of the, because craftsmanship, idea, like what constitutes that it's sort of good, they've progressed to sort of that worthy status?
well, I think that there's some depth to what it is they're trying to communicate. We are wonderfully more privy to new talent when the artists. I think there's so much more collaborative work going on, and so when those artists wind up working with others, not necessarily visual artists, it may be musicians and with film, but that they together are realizing something important to say. That's a great way, rather than having this traditional expectation, oh, I want a solo museum of just my work at the museum. Nah, maybe not so much.
It's tough. A lot of the artists that are working today were taught by artists who were working 50 years ago. So, like, to break these traditions and come up with sort of new and inventive, creative, and expressive ideas is going to take time. Like, I don't
Yeah,
think it's as common as yet as we would like it to be, but
yeah,
we're getting there. Okay. Last question about artists.
yes,
Can artists donate to a museum?
sure they can. In our federal government's wisdom, the artists can't used to. I mean, I'm old enough. I can remember even when I began work at the museum as a curator, and artists could donate work. I started in 1990, and I can't remember when the laws changed, but let's say early 90s. You could donate work to the museum and realize a full tax donation of its market value.
I thought that was still true. It's not
No,
true.
no, no, no.
Yeah.
For easily 20 years now, if you were a photographer, it's what you've spent on film and processing. It's not even your labor.
So a painter would only get the cost of canvas and paint.
Yeah. So what, and I learned this from an artist. I thought it was great. Ben Owens, he's a ceramicist from Seagrove, North Carolina. Great career. Comes from a long, distinguished line of potters. He said, "Anne, this is what I've learned to do is encourage one of my patrons, like one of my vested Medicis, who's really helped, who's believed in me, has bought my work all through my career, to have one of their patrons donate to the museum. They get a full tax write-off. Ben's work would then be in an important museum collection, and it's a great feel good for the patron. So no money is going in the artist's pocket, but their work is still in the, well, no. So say that patron buys a new work
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
from, right.
Okay, but wait a minute. So I'm totally dumbfounded by this law that you just said. So in the past, you could get a full tax write-off for the retail value of a piece that you donated to a museum. You are saying that currently the law has changed so that if an artist donates to a museum, they only get the cost of the materials, whereas
Correct.
if a person who owns a piece of art donates to a museum, they get full tax deduction for the retail value of it.
Correct.
That is ridiculous.
And that's not a new law. Like I say, it
Who
changed.
made this law? That's a
This is
ridiculous
this
law.
is the Internal Revenue. But another variation on a theme, which we're working on with a donor and a living artist right now. We have a donor who wants to buy a new work for our collection, and museums get a museum discount oftentimes. And so sometimes there's a gallery involved, and that it's a part of things. So we will buy the work from the gallery. The gallery will take their commission. The museum will get a discount. The gallery will take their commission. I don't know what their cut is. The artist will realize whatever his arrangement is with the gallery. And then our donor will write a check to Cameron Art Museum for the amount that we paid, and she will get a full tax donation.
Oh my gosh, tax law is so crazy. All right. I mean, as long as you can make it work to everybody's advantage, I don't care how people do the tax stuff. But the fact that there are laws about this is ridiculous,
But it has bearing on that artist's work being in a collection, though.
which is we all desire. So I totally get that. But wait, okay, but you brought up the idea that museum does purchase artwork.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. How does that happen? So like, I mean, okay, so let's say you're just sitting in your office and somebody just says, "Hey, I want to buy a piece of, or we need some new artwork." Like, do you like, is it based off of, "Hey, we have some extra money," or do you have to plan like years in advance, say, "Hey, we want to buy this thing in 3 years, let's fundraise for it." Like, how does the whole process of purchasing a piece of art work?
With our institution, we have a wish list,
We all have a wish list.
right? And before 1997, say for example, on our wish list, and you, institutions have a collections focus oftentimes too, which helps inform their wish list. So, for example, a part of our focus is the collection of work by North Carolina based artists. Elliot Dangerfield, preeminent 19th century painter from Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Really out of our price range, you know. And so back in the day, we would watch the auction houses, and a beautiful little Dangerfield would come up, and it might be something remotely within our price range, but we would have to bounce with it right then. We would have to go to a donor and beg, saying, "Look, we think we can purchase this for $5,000 or whatever." Now, we received a bequest in 1997 from the artist Claude Howell to purchase work considered North Carolina art. Fortunately, in his enlightenment, he left the definition of that broad, which is great. That bequest is about $1 million now, and so each year we can spend around 41,000, which is 4%.
Working off of the interest from the bequests. Yeah.
Right. And we're very conservative with the looking at the interest across a mean of 3 or 4 years. And so we have a wish list of up and comers, contemporary artists working in North Carolina or traditionalists. Exactly. So we know, right, exactly. And in 2017, we received a bequest from Louis Belden, who gave us the Modernist print collection. Louis was concerned that really the only endowment we had was just earmarked for North Carolina, and he was fearful that a provincialism would set in for the institution, and he wanted us to have unbridled, unrestricted, and so he left us the beginning of our first endowment to purchase work from. And so that's one way museums may have an acquisitions endowment fund for purchases. Otherwise, they just have to, maybe in their budget they're raising money for acquisitions.
Okay, this list that you have of like your wish list, is this a public list or is this a in-house list only?
Yeah, it's not public. It's a guide for us because then we're learning about new artists. For example, Leanne Truong, we had an exhibition of work by North Carolina Fellowship recipients, which blew our mind, and it gave us a chance to see all this new work that we didn't know about and knew that we have got to somehow find a way to acquire her work while we could still afford it. Because some young artists coming along, whoa, they're going to get out of our meager reach really soon. Because their careers are just, and so you can stray from your wish list also.
Oh, I'm just picturing in my mind if like because well, the reason why I'm thinking this is of course my parents are getting older and at some point in the next couple decades I'm going to need to be donating some pieces to some
Yeah,
museums and institutions and so I'm thinking if I knew what the wish list was
yeah,
as a public person, just like so the list was made public
it's a
basically,
really good point.
that I could sit here and go like, "Hey, wait a minute, I have one of those things on their wish list." So like
Hmm.
I could coordinate with them that upon my, future
Yes,
needing to donate to museums that I actually might have something for their wish list. So that's why
yes.
I was just wondering if that wish list was publicly known or not, or even if the public has any input on that wish list.
No, the
No,
public doesn't have input on the wish list.
it's fine. It's just an idea.
That's a really good idea. It's managing expectations also from the
Yeah.
public because there's an acquisitions committee review. We're already outstripped with storage, and that's a common problem with institutions. But you're absolutely right. Say, for example, we know that we have a commitment to the collection of work on paper, and as you well know, with prints, we discussed this when we spoke briefly before, and so that's a really good idea.
But it's just one of those things that like it might help to get the public at large more involved and knowledgeable about the workings of the
You're
museum and how
right.
the process works and all this so they would appreciate it more because they somehow felt like they were involved in it.
You're right.
Just my 2 cents.
We do have a membership level for that purpose too. It's not as democratic as you're proposing, but it's a basic annual giving society, and for that donation, like I'm a founding member, I know that I'm going to have three unusual educational opportunities regarding art collecting and education in the course of a year. I'll have perhaps a private tour of a private collection in someone's home, a tour of a new architectural structure in town after hours, and I'm assured a dinner in February at the museum where the staff trots out 5 works of art that we aspire to acquire, and the individuals of the Giving Society, we make a case as to why we want to purchase this work by Matthew Dols, why we want to purchase this work by Beverly McKeever. And we make a case as compelling, showing no favorites whatsoever, because we want all 5 of these works. but with the money from endowment, we might only be able to buy two. And so this group gets to vote on who the winner is.
And is this that Compass group that I've
Yeah,
heard about?
yeah. And then, as last year, what happens is that so many folks fall in love with everything that folks raise their hands and say, "Well, I'll buy that for the museum. Well, I'll get that for the museum."
I need to meet some of these people. These
It's
people sound
so.
marvelous.
We were looking at the work of Phil Freelon. He was the architect of the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History and Culture, and he was a photographer, and he just passed away last year. So back to your question, we were able to work with Phil in the last 2 months of his life putting this show together. We rearranged heaven and earth to make that happen because he's such a great, great, great man. And so we were able to acquire three works from his collection instead of just one. So it's back to your point about the excitement of the education of it all grows donations.
Okay, now you brought up something that I have a huge interest in, which is the nature of storage for museums. Because I would listen to the Malcolm Gladwell podcast where he had this huge gripe about museums basically hoarding all of the great cultural things and throwing them into storage units and not exhibiting majority of things. Have you
Hmm.
heard this podcast?
No, I need to.
It is revisionist history, newest season, quite
Okay.
good. Quite, I mean, I love museums, and I was listening to it, and I got a little upset listening to it. I'm like, damn it, because some of the bigger institutions, you just buy and buy and buy and throw things in storage and never exhibit them. Well, I mean,
Hmm.
yours, of course, is a little bit different. But so the question being is, what kind of limitations, like how do you do it? Like I don't even know, like, do you store things on site or do you have like external storage? Do you like, how do museums do this?
We have storage on site and, unfortunately, now external, expensive, climate controlled storage because our space is outstripped. And that's another reason why museums oftentimes have capital campaigns to grow the facility. Ours is 20 years old. What we projected as our storage need, back in 2001, it's changed a bit. And so we're trying to figure any kind of reconfiguration to expand storage. And then we have some loan exhibitions that are in storage also. But we just got a gift of 800 concrete sculptures by Annie Hooper, the outsider artist who worked in Buxton, North Carolina. Do you know Annie's work?
Not by name.
She filled her house with little biblical characters that are 2 feet high. You've got to look her up, Matthew. Her home was so populated, she had to use a stick to turn the light switch off and on. She couldn't move around.
I will put a link to her in the show notes.
Yes, and so we were, particularly since we're situated in eastern North Carolina, it was appropriate that over 3,000 of her artworks, they were dispersed among different institutions. The Kohler Art Center received a goodly number, but we were very interested in her work too, and so we had to have offsite storage for Annie.
Well, I mean, but I mean, that's the thing because like I'm asking about like donations and purchasing works and then storage. I mean, this is a consideration that every museum and of course yours needs to take into consideration. So like you can't just say we're going to buy these monumental pieces because you just don't. I mean, besides you can't afford it, but you also might not be able to store it. So like
Right.
that's a tough sort of balance to continually ride because you want to grow as a museum and you want to get bigger and better and more prestigious pieces, but you also have the limitations of not just your exhibition halls but your storage capabilities.
Exactly. And so it's not for the faint of heart to take the stewardship piece so seriously. The decisions that current leadership makes, the leadership 20 years from now is having to deal with, or 30 years from now. And so to take care of materiality in perpetuity, I mean, the artwork never grows up and goes away. You invested to care for it
Well, which is a question, like, so, I've heard of stories of museums selling off lesser works in order to raise money to buy new works and stuff. Do you all have something in your bylaws that, like, you don't sell works, or do you sell works?
We have our collections policy is completely unconditional. If we accept, say, a Leonard Baskin print
No specific person in
from
mind there.
from a local private collector,
She's poking fun at me and my family pieces.
and we have Baskin in the collection, so chances are we definitely would acquire that work. However, we would make sure that the donor understood that the work is going through acquisitions committee review and it may or may not be acquired for the collection. And if it's not acquired for the collection, we would sell it, or, I mean, we would have freedom to do whatever with it. But if we acquire the work, then there is the commitment on the part of the institution to take care of it in perpetuity. The only way it would be sold or given away then, it would be de-accessioned, and that is an extremely serious decision for a museum to make. For instance, we have never de-accessioned anything.
Which was gonna be my next question, yes.
There's process with that too, because, say that Baskin print, we would go to her heirs to offer them the golden opportunity to buy the work back. So there's a lot of process. But say, for example, the New York Historical Society, I remember years ago, they had hit on really hard times. This happens with museums. And one of your greatest assets is your collection oftentimes. And they were talking about selling their Audubon print collection. You may remember that. Oh, the hue and cry. It's fraught politically and ethically, and should be. So that decision to acquire the work is a big one. So people give us work oftentimes, and for example, the artist Clyde Jones just gave us over 200 of his paintings, and he said, "Anne, you do with these what is best for the institution." And we had a very successful sale. We acquired some of the work. We have some of it set aside, and over 100 paintings sold, which helped us with our operations budget at a time that's dire.
Okay, wait a minute. You did a sale of this person's art. If I like, so I'm thinking for me, like, so what if I wanted to buy one of those? How would I have heard about this sale?
It was publicly promoted, and we had it at the museum, and
Oh, okay.
promoted on social media and e-blasts and featured articles and TV interviews, and
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I'm just wondering. So basically, if somebody is listening to this from around the world, they should just get on your email list, is what you're saying.
There you go.
Okay,
There you go.
that's what I'm getting to. Okay, you were talking about like the collections and the stewardship of it and things like this. Now, I grew up in Washington D.C., and when I was in high school, I had the incredible luxury and privilege of being able to literally go into the Smithsonian, East Wing, contemporary modern art, and go into their collections and do my research on my art history paper by like handling the artwork in their collection space. So my question is like, if somebody's doing research on something about something you have in your collection, or they just want to even have sort of basically a private showing of something that they're very enamored with, is your private collection open for public interaction?
Absolutely. We work with scholars and students often, and we have the only Minnie Evans Study Center extant. As you know, she's an important artist from this region. So, yeah, but it's to set up, an appointment. Sometimes people will have students or scholars will have a lengthy research project, and that we love that because it's only helping us learn more about the collection. It's heaven, particularly for a small staff.
Great. I mean,
Yeah.
as I said, like, it was fabulous for me and as a high school student, and so it's nice to know that that opportunity is not just a Smithsonian thing.
No, no, no. Mm-mm. Shouldn't be.
Adam, I did my high school research papers at the Library of Congress also. So, I used all those ridiculous things. It was great fun.
Oh.
But my last big sort of thing that I have on my mind, I haven't really talked about this publicly yet, but like, as a lot of the collectors that are out in the world are starting to age, and their estates are going to sort of be passed on generation on generation, a lot of next generations might not want everything from the household, and they might want to make arrangements to donate work in advance to some institutions. Like,
Mhm.
is this how is that handled? Because, like, I'm thinking for myself, like, my parents have some amazing artworks that I love them, but I don't want them necessarily in my home when they pass away. But I
Mhm.
would love them to see them available to the public in some way. So
Mhm. Mhm.
how can basically sort of like estate planning for people with some art collections be done in advance? Because you don't want to wait until somebody actually dies, because then it's all emotional and traumatic and all that. But
Right.
if you could set it up in advance and say, okay, when, like, let's say I have some amazing art collection, I could find a museum that I love or admire, or their
Right.
collection fits with my collection, and
Right.
can it be done? Can people say, okay, I will
Absolutely.
give you a contract that says upon my death, you get
Mhm.
XYZ? Is
Mhm.
this something you all do?
Absolutely, that can happen, and it's called a. Oftentimes, it's a promised gift. Our experience has been wonderful in that regard and heartbreaking in that regard because, for example, time and again, a collector will intend to give that work, fully intend, but maybe the paperwork isn't absolutely signed, sealed, delivered. He or she passes away, and the children have an entirely different motivation. And the institution, for example, our little museum took care of a beautiful bronze of a Cupid and a gazelle, Cupid and a gazelle. Oh, so beautiful. And we took care of it. We paid conservators to help with some vice that was on the bronze, the little gazelle's back, on and on and on. Well, the donor passed away. The children wanted it back, and so that was remiss on the museum's part, and the not seeking clarification on that gift. But yeah, it's just to get estate planning lawyers involved, and it's so much fun, Matt, because you don't have to die to enjoy seeing what your the effect, the influence it's having on the community. Our recent gift of modernist prints, we borrowed selections of them through the years, and so the donor could see. He would come and visit from San Francisco. He could hear the community saying, "Oh, Mr. Belden, this is so incredible." He could be a part of the process. It was gorgeous.
So do it early and do it legally.
Yeah, and to be so respectful of what the museum what the museum is taking on, taking care of that work, and showing it. But it's such a great advantage for the museum because the longer the work is at the museum, if the family is going back and forth at all, it helps all the family see this is really a great thing to consider.
Well, and I had a previous guest on, Amy Potzik, that it does estate planning for artists, and how artists can also sort of contact institutions, whether they're libraries or museums or whatever, to basically prearrange to have their, not just their artwork, but like their sketchbooks or other sundry things from their stuff, to create sort of an educational longevity and legacy for that artist at a particular museum. Is this something that the Cameron is hoping or does currently do?
We have not pursued that, but we would be very interested in it because the collections we do have that are from sketchbooks on, where we have the papers, we have all that context that helps tremendously. And then, of course, the students and scholars visiting, it's it's priceless. It's and then also say for instance the Annie Hooper collection, when there are key institutions, when it's not just one institution, this whole repository is being looked at, then maybe two or three museums work together. So no one's taking on that much storage and care, but it gives those institutions a chance to work together.
Last little two sort of things that I want to touch on. Is there any topic that you would like to bring up or discuss that I have not brought up that you think is sort of important for listeners to understand about not only you and your role, but the Cameron Art Museum as a whole?
Just where you live, if an institution, an art museum, an institution really has deep meaning for you, communicate with that institution as to why and how, and if it's not meeting your needs, communicate, because the stakeholders, those of us who really need these institutions, that's the only way we're going to stay relevant and support the heck out of them, because we're, particularly with the pandemic, we're going to lose what, 12% of our institutions at least.
Yeah, conservatively,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, because like I mean, I'm thinking as an artist, because of course I'm an artist also. Like I'm remembering stories about people saying like, "Oh, if you want to get into a particular museum, what you do is you get one of the board of directors or the board of trustees to purchase some of your works, so that then they go back as a board member and sort of encourage collecting the work of you."
Hmm.
Does that kind of cunning plan really work?
I'm sure it does. I haven't had direct experience with it, but of course that's very attention getting.
I would imagine it would not work. Like if I were to, as an artist, come directly to you and say, "Hey, Anne, would you buy a piece of my work for the museum?" Like that wouldn't work. Because it needs the support of all these other people. Like it's not just one. One of the things that a lot of people think about museums is they think like one person makes all the decisions, but
No, no.
it's not that
Mm-mm,
at all. It's
mm-mm.
a groups and committees and all these kinds of things. But
It
okay,
is.
last little thing is any advice for any particular, like you can choose curators, other museums, museum directors, artists, anybody in the arts industry, some advice for them.
Oh, the artists just to keep working hard. Oh my gosh. And again, as I pointed out, if there's a way to not work necessarily in isolation, the artists that really have become close with our institution, they have been so willing to teach or do a tour, or that there was some kind of educational, there's no greater generosity really oftentimes than from artists. They're not, you know I mean, they're so passionate about their work, and those which were so readily willing to help us educationally, we need them in our life. And of course, in that, you grow more interested in their work. And then when opportunities, it might not be with our institution, but to know that X does great work in fiber, we might be talking with another museum that's doing a fiber exhibition or something and say, "Oh, have you looked at the work of so and so?" So it's to really become familiar with your institution.
Okay, wait, you just brought something up. Museums talk to other museums.
Absolutely.
We imagine you all are islands upon yourselves and you only care about
Nah,
yourselves.
no, and that's been another advantage with the pandemic, was, forcing us to, well, we became very, in the state, we became very politically activist to try to reopen. And so, as you know, the Asheville Art Museum in Western North Carolina, their director corralled all the collecting institutions for us to present a united front to the governor to allow us to reopen. We're losing our shirts. I laid off 29 staff members. And so being able to, we're closer now, even for that political activism. And we trade, we'll do, we're borrowing from one another. And not all states may be this way, or other regions in the country, but the state of North Carolina is so big, we need to look at it as one big community to share resources. And so that's whether it's visual art, music, theater, dance. So we work with musicians and filmmakers and dancers and from all over. So absolutely we work with each other.
Marvelous. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Matthew. It's such a pleasure being with you. Working in the museum profession is probably, fortunately, much more formalized now than when I came along. But here I was from a relatively small town where any kind of jobs opportunity was pretty scarce. But I wanted to work in the art field somehow. I was a painter. Studio was that was all I knew. And so I'm selling clothes, working in a restaurant. We all know those tunes. So our museum, I met the director. I had some of my work shown there, and his name was Ren Brown, and I kept saying, Ren, haven't you got any job? I'll mop floors. I'll be a security guard. Don't you have anything? I just want to get my foot in the door. Oh, no, your way. No, that wouldn't suit you. And so I began to volunteer. And all of our hires, even to this day, that's one of the first places we look is our volunteer corps, because we already know that person's chops. We already know that they're a joy to work with, et cetera. So I began to work with the membership database, which I had done for public radio back in the day. So I knew how to do that. And interestingly, our state arts council used to have a salary assistance grant stream, which was a 4-year grant. And for a small institution to try to create a new salary position is really, really hard. And so the grant stream would be 100%, first year 75, 50, get the picture. And then by that time, the institution may have enough sea legs to keep that job. So our institution got a salary assistance grant to hire a curator and registrar of collections at $18,000 with no health benefits. This is in 1990. And so I applied for the job, and I think the only reason that I got it is that Ren had been in Paris all summer. He hadn't been dealing with filling the job, and he was going to lose the grant money if he didn't hire the next person that walked in the door that was warm. And so he said, why don't you take this job? You get a chance to work with art and exhibitions. It'll be great. And I said, okay. And I walked from the museum to our local library, which was a few blocks, and I looked up the word curator. I didn't know what one was. He did say, I can teach you this business. I can't teach you to have an eye, was the word back then, but I can teach you this business. So if you really have fire in your belly for this most fulfilling job, it's a great industry. It's extraordinarily generous all across the world. The museum folks that we've worked with larger treasure houses, the Met, MFA Boston, you name it, they have been just as accessible as museums that were more our size. So
yeah, that would not work today, what you just said, but yeah. That was so of its time. Yeah.
So it can go on the editing room floor, but it did happen.
Oh, no. This will be a little added thing I'm going to throw on at the end. And I'm even going to leave this as well because this is thoroughly entertaining. So, yes.
The Latin root of curator is lovely.
Is it really?
It's just to take care. Take care. Curate.
Tell that to Instagram. Okay.